Hello, everybody. It's Stephen and Walter here today for So Chatty. And it is episode number 92, and it is February the 24th, 2023. So we have things to talk about as we usually do. But before we get into that, what has Walter been working on? Nothing. And why do I ask? Every week it's like,
Well, I haven't been doing any sewing, but I've been doing other things.
like what?
Like,
I'm not talking about household things like blowing out the driveway and blowing out the neighbor's driveway and blowing out the old man across the street's driveway out there with it all. Um, Anything else you've been doing?
well, I've been researching my income taxes, and I've been researching
yes.
lights for the.
Oh yes, our another panel of grow lights. Well, tune into Stephen and Walter live for more information about that when we talk about that on Sunday.
Yeah, our grow operation.
Our grow op. We're getting into this in a big way, but that's for Sunday for Stephen and Walter live. So that's a little teaser. We'll talk more about that then. So what have I been working on? Well, a leftover. If I get the right button, there we go. I called it a leftover. You've already seen the star-crossed quilt by Cozy Quilts Design that I did out of all the same colors. But I had all these pieces left over. For some reason, I made more half square triangles than I needed, and then I had some fabric strips left over and that kind of thing. So I just threw them up on my design wall and sewed them as they came up, and this was the end result. It is not perfect because it didn't follow a pattern. There's a little bit of fudging to get things to fit here and there, as you can probably tell in the picture. But I threw it on Lucy yesterday and I bound it today, and it's just a lap quilt, but I doubled the batting in it, so it's very fluffy. Hard to see that in the picture. And yeah, I'm going to use it. It's just for me. I'm not giving it away to anybody. Well, no, I wouldn't give it to somebody because it's a little wonky. Now, okay, those pieces are straight. It's just that when I laid it on the carpet to take the picture, I have nowhere that I can hang them to take a decent picture. That's the problem. Maybe I should run out into the backyard in the snowdrifts and hang them up on the fence and take pictures of them. That would be cute with the bunnies all sitting there and the chipmunks and a little skunk and that. Yeah.
And a possum.
Possum or two, a little coyote munching on my leg, whatever. The little dog next door, coyote munching on his leg. Well, whatever. But anyways, so yeah. So it's all leftovers. And it'll do for when I'm watching TV laying on the couch. It's a little drafty down in our rec room these days. I don't know why. Probably because we need new windows down there too. I get a little chilly. So usually I used to be always very hot. And you always find that I was always hot.
Yeah, well, you're an old man now. You're an old man now.
Yeah.
Old men need hot. Well,
yeah, right. Well, now I have to cuddle up underneath a quilt, so that one will do that. Okay, so today, without further ado, we're going to talk about what, in our opinion, what is a well-written or perfect pattern. You know from things I've discussed before that there are some patterns I never have a problem with. They're so well-written, i.e. Cozy Quilt Designs. Never had a bad pattern from them, ever. My recommendation if you're making bags, get the patterns from By Annie. Never a problem with those either. They're very long, but that's why there isn't any problems with them, because they're very, very well explained, step by step, lots of details. And that, in my mind, makes a good pattern. But I've had some others that, even if you were an experienced quilter and you've been quilting for 30 years, I think you'd be challenged by the way some of these patterns have been written. And talking to Walter about it, he's had a few of those kind of patterns as well, right?
Yeah, well, yeah, a lot of the patterns that I've used so far, I've had a class that I've had gone on to with, and so I have the instructor has said that there's flaws in the pattern, and I have discovered it when I've tried to recreate the clothing article of clothing, that I've run into problems when I'm trying to remember what we did, type of thing. or trying to decipher the pictures that are on the because they aren't always clear. Plus, I haven't finished this pattern, but I did another pattern that I started, and I had made a muslin for it. And I was reading the pattern, and a lot of it didn't really make a lot of sense to me. And it just so happened that that was when I was taking a class with the gentleman that actually had written the pattern. So I spoke to him about it, and he gave me some guidance on it and things like that. And there's a whole other thing to consider about patterns, what he told me about that I wasn't aware of, which I'll talk
Yes,
about
I was going to say, are we jumping ahead here?
Yeah, we are.
Yeah, because let's back it up a bit. But I am sure many of you have seen a pattern, you looked at the picture on it, you loved it, and you bought it. Then you got it home, you started working with it, and probably about midpoint, there was something that you scratched your head at, or something you realized you haven't done correctly. And it was really no fault of your own. It was the way the pattern was written. Sometimes patterns leave out things as well. Or sometimes I've even gone through a pattern where they tell you to do one thing. Later on in the pattern, you're doing the same thing again, but they've given you a different set of instructions on how to do it, and you don't get the same result. I imagine that writing a pattern, well, if you've ever tried to write a pattern, I have, and it's a hard thing. It's a very hard thing, because I think you've got what a lot of pattern writers, in my opinion, don't do is take into consideration that whoever is using this pattern, I think they should classify them as a rank beginner. If you write for somebody at the lowest denominator of skill, then they can get through it and it'll be easy for them. And the people who are skilled with it will go, oh yeah, I know what you're doing here, and go right on ahead. I don't think you can err on giving too much information for it. But some of these designers, they give a minimal amount and they make some basic assumptions, which they should never do. So what's the first thing that you hear this all the time that you should do when you get a pattern? And I am famous for not doing this. And that's read the pattern from beginning to end. And I'll skim them sometimes, but I'm impatient. So I don't really read them. But really what that instruction is talking about is a little bit more than just read it. It means sit there with a pencil in your hand and analyze the pattern. Ideally, you should spend the time going through it and starring or circling sections that don't make sense to you, or you know you're going to have a problem with, and then come back to those and study them a little further. Now, here's where you might, if you suspect there's a problem, an error, here's where you should maybe go to the website where the pattern was created and find if they have an updated version, because oftentimes pattern makers do find some mistakes in them after they've gone out and they create a new version of it or correct a certain part of it. So that is something, and I forget to do that all the time. But part of the reason I forget to do that is because I don't read the pattern all the way through and think about it. I just bang, leap right in, go right to the cutting instructions and says, you know, or first, here's the fabric you need. Great. Now cut this, cut this, cut this, cut this. That's dangerous, especially if you only have so much fabric. Because I can tell you how many times I've made mistakes in the cutting or whatever, because I just jumped right into it. Have you had that problem?
Not really. I usually read
You're
the pattern
perfect.
all the way through.
Oh, okay. So you have two approaches here. Mine is, let's just get on with it. Walter says, let's take a week or two and think about it and digest it. Okay. So probably most people are in between our two extremes. So what are we going to do? Well, first of all, let's talk about before we even start, we're going to actually take two patterns and analyze them and point out what we think are good and what things we might have problems with and why. But right off the top of your head, for a sewing pattern, for a garment pattern, what is it that you would look for that would give you, like you would say, it's a good pattern?
just general. Well, first of all, I would like the pattern to be in both metric and imperial, because in Canada we buy our fabric in meters, so it would be nice to get an estimation in meters. So it's not that hard to convert, but you can. But it would be nice to have it in both. The other thing is, I would skim the pattern through to see if it has like lots of pictures on how to put things together, and just and finishing instructions. I always look at finishing instructions, because some are a little bit more detailed and others just sort of assume you know how to finish it.
So one of those assumption things.
Yeah.
Well, your first comment, I don't disagree with it, but doesn't bother me, because quilting patterns are always written in imperial or linear. I've, at least in North America, I've never had a pattern that is written in metric. And so for me, I tend to use linear, or
Yeah, well, I can
not linear, but what is
I
it?
can
Imperial.
I can see quilting patterns tend to be more in linear or imperial measurements, right?
Like, I don't even know what a quarter inch is in metric.
Uh,
Of course you do.
no, 3/8 of an inch is 1 centimeter. So
Okay, but I'm not using 3/8 of an inch.
no,
But anyways, it doesn't really matter. The point is, I can live with that. In fact, I'm so used to it, that doesn't bother me. Although the one thing that does bother me a little bit is, because they measured their fabric, their yardage, and I just used the word. It's all in yardage, it's not meterage. And we buy our fabric for the most part in meters. I mean, it's not a big thing. What I usually do is, if a pattern says you need 2 yards of this particular fabric, I just go, I'll buy 2 meters. I know I'm going to have 6 inches more than I need, because a meter is 39 inches, and a yard is 36. But I don't mind buying the little extra, because I'll probably screw up anyway, so I can use the extra fabric. So that doesn't bother me. Now, the second thing you said is you'd like to look for something that has lots of diagrams and pictures. And I agree with that too. Because some methods in quilting, you need to see a picture of what they're talking about, for the way you cut the fabric. Like, if the fabric is directional, meaning it's got a print that you really want it to go in the right way, it's good to have a diagram showing you, like arrows. It's good to have diagrams showing you which way they want you to press the seams as well. That is very helpful.
yeah, and in garment sewing, there's a big complication in that there are times where you need to use the right side of the fabric, and sometimes you need to use the wrong side of the fabric. And so you need a clear distinction between those two sides of the fabric when you're working with in a pattern that's distinct.
Do you have to deal with a lot of short forms, like initials, for things that stand for something?
With the fabric and things.
Okay, so like quilting, yes. But I do appreciate it, even though I know WOF with the fabric, RST, right sides together, HST, half square triangle. I mean, those are pretty standard. However, again, if they have special, some of them do use special initials for things, or ones you don't see as often. And that's probably rare in the patterns that I have experienced, but it does happen a few times. And if they don't explain somewhere what they mean by that, you're lost. You're completely lost.
Plus, in garment, you really need also to have a clear understanding of what kind of interfacing you require in the garment. So,
yeah, well, it's something we have to worry about as quilters. But I would say that what makes a good quilting pattern, I really like things put in to chunks, cutting, and it's big bold type, cutting instructions, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and then assembly or making. I'd like to see it in chunks, because that's the way my brain works. It takes a large thing and it breaks it down to smaller components. So that appeals to me, and most patterns that I've dealt with usually do something like that. But I have had a few patterns where there's nothing. It's all numbered, but it goes from 1 to 100. And in those numbers are cut this, cut this, cut this. Or what is worse, and I have seen this on a few patterns, they first of all talk about, okay, cut this, then assemble this, then cut this, but you're cutting it from the same fabric again. And it's bouncing back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. And my brain doesn't work that way. My brain likes to look at, okay, cutting is separate from building the quilt, from doing the finishing, all that kind of stuff. So yeah, I like it to be organized. I like it to be numbered. I like to have important details put in bold type or in italics. Bold is better because my eyes pick up on that, because your eyes do. If it's something that's important, it should be in bold, because your eye will immediately go to that and you go, ooh, warning, warning, Will Robinson, I should pay attention to this kind of thing. So those are good patterns that do that. Bad patterns are ones that try to get all the instructions on one sheet of paper. And you've seen those ones. Often those are ones that are freebies, because a fabric company is trying to sell a fabric line, and so they throw in a free pattern, and they're usually condensed and squished down into like 1 or 2 pages. And that means they have to either condense the instructions and or make the type smaller.
Yeah, like I haven't actually worked with them, but there are patterns on some clothing fabric stores where they will include a free pattern for like a bomber jacket or something like that, but the pattern's very abbreviated.
Yeah.
So without a lot of detailed instructions. I've seen the patterns. I haven't actually worked with one, but I have seen the patterns. And yeah, you're great. You're getting a free pattern, but it doesn't, you have to really know what you're doing.
And that's
to be able to follow it.
And that's what they're doing. They're making a basic assumption there that, oh, well, you already are a master seamstress or whatever, and you can like rattle this off because most of the things here, the instructions you don't need, you know, you've done it before. No. How do people learn how to make things? And it would seem to me that economically speaking, business-wise, if you write patterns like that, you're not going to sell a lot of patterns because people are going to say, oh, I don't know how to do that. That's too complex. And so it would only make good economic sense to spend the time to give more details in your patterns. So I guess what would I do? What to me is a perfect pattern? Well, I think I've already stated it. To me, a perfect pattern is things are broken down in logical units of thought, and those units of thought are broken down into step by step in chronological order, in the order you need to do them in. Clearly written English. If there's going to be any short forms, those short forms are right at the beginning of the pattern, and it's all defined for you. Anything that might have the slightest possibility of being misunderstood in the actual writing, because it is difficult to write instructions sometimes for this, that there's a diagram, a clear diagram. Like, for example, there are some patterns I bought where they have actual physical pictures that someone has taken. Their hands are in the way, or they don't translate very well when you go to, if it's a PDF pattern, it doesn't print out clearly, or even in some commercial ones that I've seen that they don't print. They're grainy, they're too far away, you can't see what's going on. Ideally, it would be nice with any kind of pattern that is fairly complex, I'd like to see a video of it as well. Now, yes, that's asking a lot at that point, but Bags by Annie, she has videos for all of her bags. She charges you. If you buy the pattern, you pay an additional $5. You have access to the video. She usually has the videos on a private network, but you can go back to them as many times as you need to. And I find I use those all the time with hers. I find them very, very clear. They're very professional, very well done.
Yeah, some clothing manufacturers, some clothing pattern manufacturers have video tutorials to go through making a garment, and a lot of times they're free because they assume that you really need to have the pattern before you can sew it together. So because, you know, for sizing and things like that. So But it's an additional help.
Yep.
To do that.
I mean, yes,
sometimes
it takes more time for them to do that. But in this day and age of YouTube, everybody's on YouTube. So, and I would be willing to pay a couple of bucks extra to have that ability to see a visual, like a recorded video of it. Here's something though that you may or may not have thought of, but this really bugs me. Patterns that are multiple pages and the pages aren't numbered.
Oh yeah, that bothers me too.
Because it is sometimes very difficult if you get your pages are all mixed up because you're madly cutting something, you move this page over here, you come back to it, and you're trying to figure out what the order is again, if you've never done it. A really good example of where this needs to be done more is some embroidery patterns, like for machine embroidery, they can be 20, 30, 40 pages long and not a number on them. That drives me mental. The first thing I do with patterns like that is I look to see if the pages are numbered, and when they come out of my printer, I take them and I staple them together to keep them in the order, because I know I'm going to get them mixed up if I don't, because you're leafing through, you're going back and forward all around on it.
And that's important for garment construction, that you're doing things in the order of when you're sewing the garment together, so that you can't put a collar on a shirt without putting front and backs together first, right? So
I don't know, I've never done one. Makes sense to me. I don't know, sewing a sleeve to the collar.
Oh, go away.
You're never going to live that down, because I'm always going to remind you of it. So suck it up. Okay, so we have here, I found a couple of articles, one for quilting and one for sewing a garment. Some information, if I can get it up here on my screen for you, and I will here. I found information about designing patterns. If this is supposed to be for like the one I've got up here, and I've put this link in the show notes below, how to design a quilt pattern for beginners. And there's some interesting things in here that I thought would be helpful. Now they tell you what you need, what you should have for writing a pattern. They recommend electric quilt. Yeah, that's a story for another day. They talk about, they'll begin with the basics. The best places to begin is with some basic traditional quilt blocks. You can use 1 or 2 quilt blocks, or as many as you like. So they say, in other words, start simple and build on all of that. Because that's what you're essentially doing when you're making a quilt. You're building on basic patterns, basic blocks, and going forth with those. Figuring out things like borders and sashing, colors, yeah, all of that. But, oh yeah, that's something that's important. Color. In a PDF pattern, everybody has a printer that is capable of printing color in this day and age. So why not, especially in, well, neither format, in printed or in PDF format, why not put your pattern in color? Look at this. They're showing here, black and white. Well, yeah, but this shows you the contrast. This helps when you pick your colors that you want to use too. I did one, actually, those of you that were part of Stephanie and Steven's collaborative so long, the pattern that we did, the first bunch of colors I picked did not work because I didn't have enough contrast. You couldn't see the stars in that. I corrected it by choosing other colors, but the pattern itself did not have colored pictures. So yeah, black and white. Yeah, okay, so this is your dark and these are your lights. But if you're not doing it in black and white, you're doing it in color, well, not all colors have the same contrast against each other. Like I dare say even this here in the center that they're showing here in this pinky blue color, I don't think that's a good contrast combination on that, but they're just using that for another example. Now, here's some things. Don't forget your seam allowance. Well, most patterns tell you that it's supposed to be a 1/4 inch seam allowance. It's funny. I don't think I've ever come across a pattern that hasn't said use all seam allowances are 1/4 inch. This is for quilting, not for
Yeah, well,
making.
garment, they usually do that too. They usually say it's the standard for garments most of the time is 5/8 of an inch, but some will use 3/8 of an inch. But they usually state that right at the very beginning that it's all your seams have to be either 5/8 or 3/8 of an inch.
But I've had other patterns that have never stated that. It's just assumed you know that. Well, and I would too. I would say, well, yeah, that's basic to quilting. It's a 1/4 inch seam allowance. But I have met people who have tried to do their first quilt and didn't realize that that's what you use. And their quilt did not turn out.
Yeah, so you're saying that the pattern should be written for the beginner in mind.
That's right.
Yeah.
But I mean, if you were a beginner and you just started, and let's say you're somebody that came from sewing background, from a garment sewing, you might just assume, well, if I have to make, I'm making a seam, so I'll do 3/8 of an inch. That's what my sewing machine's set up for. That's what I'm used to. Didn't say I couldn't. Well, yeah, what would happen in a quilt, because they are very math intense, is your blocks would not fit together.
No.
With that. So yeah, you would have a problem. Says rule 2, as stated above, make sure your blocks are divisible by the same number. Okay, I showed you that quilt at the beginning of today's program. Well, one of the reasons why I was sort of fudging fitting my pieces together is because I really didn't sit down and think about what my basic block size was going to be. Quilt making is very, very mathematical. And there are some people who write quilts or quilt patterns who fudge it too, which is not a good thing. It's just too confusing. When cutting squares, always add a 1/2 inch for your seam allowance. I don't know where that's coming from. Oh, I know what they mean. Or add a 1/2 inch for seam allowance. Okay. One of the things that's very confusing about quilt patterns is finished and unfinished. Unfinished means what you cut your piece of fabric for making the block is. So here in the example, it would say in a good pattern, if you want 4-inch squares, you should tell the person you got to cut those 4.5 inches. That's what they call unfinished, because you lose a 1/4 inch away around the entire square. So if you want a finished square, you want your finished square all sewn into the quilt to measure from one seam to the other 4 inches. What you cut has to be, you have to add a 1/2 inch to it. Some patterns will tell you that, some don't, and you don't know if are they talking unfinished or finished. It makes a big difference. And I've done many patterns where they just make the assumption that you are automatically going, when you see 4 inch, that's all you see is 4 inch, they mean cut your square 4.5 inches. A beginner's not going to know that, and sometimes you may not know that if they don't specify it. They talk here about a lot of other things. This is more written from the point of view of someone that's going to be writing a pattern, possibly for the first time. And they talk about calculating fabric, but that just gives you a couple of other ideas. Now, I found one for writing sewing patterns. So Walter can address this. Start each sentence. This was, I thought, was interesting. Start each sentence with a verb. A verb is an action word, like running is a verb. Verbs make us feel active and enthusiastic. Some good sentence starting verbs include stitch, pinch, zip, thread, cut, secure, pin, press, and turn. Sometimes it's simple as reordering the parts of a sentence to put the action first. Word. Okay, so this is not something I've ever considered. In the pattern you're looking at right now, do they start with a
finish top pointed edge of pocket, fold out pocket? That's
well, fold is a verb.
Finish is a verb.
Finish is a verb.
There's a short form here. I'm not sure what it is.
Oh, okay.
It's right sides together. Yeah, right sides together. But I don't know
How
why
do
it's
you get a
W.
W in front? Okay, well, let's
Yeah,
not
I'm not
jump
sure.
ahead.
I'm not sure.
We're just talking verbs at the moment. So I never
It says
thought,
pin to
okay,
pin.
so I never thought of the importance of that. That wasn't something that has given me problems. Uh, Now it says write with a warm and friendly tone. Well, I don't know. Do you find that pattern you're looking at warm and friendly?
Not really. I mean, maybe the basic start instructions should be warm and friendly.
Like, but I want to get on with the job. I don't need to have a
Yeah.
person. Now, okay, here's something. Some patterns, there is a personal little note from the pattern designer. Oh, thank you so much for purchasing my pattern. I hope you have hours of fun doing this. I've been making patterns since I was 12 years old, and I really enjoy it. And my goal in life is this: my family, my husband, my 12 children, and my 3 dogs and a cat. We all hope you're. I don't care. I don't. I don't care. So I don't know why you would do that. I want to get into how to do the thing, but whatever. Now, here, number 3, though. Be consistent. Choose one font and one font size for the main text. Stick to it throughout. And that's important because I'm looking at the pattern you've got right here. You've got bold. You've got headings that are a little larger than the instructions and that. The reason I like that is because you very clearly see what I was saying before about the chunking of information. So I think that's a good thing. Next one says break the process down to logical steps, then into step, or into logical sections, then into steps. That's what I said before.
Yeah, that's important.
That's when we used to teach kids how to write instructions when I was a teacher. And that was one of the main things we told them about: break it down into smaller units of thought. And we would have the kids actually, as an assignment, write simple instructions for a simple activity that they could bring the equipment into the classroom, very simple stuff like tying a shoe or something like that, and write the instructions. And then to see how clearly they wrote the instructions, we would exchange them with another student, and the other student would have to do exactly what was there. It was hilarious. Absolutely hilarious. The whole point was showing the kids how to write clearly, how to break instructions down by step.
So in garment sewing, there's often what do you call them?
I don't know, what do you call them?
There are notches inside your on your pattern pieces, right? To help you with placement. So those should actually be in the instructions for setting the pattern in. I did hear sleeves, for instance, usually have a double notch for the back of the sleeve and a single notch for the front of the sleeve, and a matching notches on the main side of the garment. And I have heard of patterns where they've omitted the notches and assume that you know enough on which side is the front and which side is the back, which is actually, no matter how many shirts I've done, I'd be lost without doing the notches.
So do they put in a legend for that at the first usually and say, okay, when you see a single arrow or whatever, it means this. If you see a double arrow, it means that?
No, not necessarily. They will as you're going along, if you've notched your items properly, it's in the pattern when you're sewing it together. So,
but they don't really.
There isn't really a legend because there is a standard format on shirts.
But how did you learn the standard format?
By sewing. Yeah, I'm not sure actually.
If you didn't take a class,
yeah,
how would you?
It should have be in the front of the pattern to tell you that, or in the pattern itself when you're sewing a sleeve in, it should say your double notches at the back, your single notches at the front.
And I'm assuming what you're talking about by notches is on the actual pattern that you put on the fabric to cut it out.
Yeah, well, on the pattern, the piece that you're cutting it, it'll have the notch on there. But when you're sewing it together, it should be in the instructions about how to place the sleeve into the armhole, by saying that you put the 2 notches at the back and the single notch at the front.
Right into the instructions.
Yeah, it should be. Yeah, if it's not, sometimes Occasionally it's been left out, and there's the assumption that you already know to
But
do
there's
that.
see, and that's what I'm saying. You can't make that kind of an assumption. If you want to write a good pattern, you have to assume that the person who's doing it has picked up the pattern for the first time in their life and know nothing about doing that garment
Exactly.
sewing. So, like I said, it's better to give too much information, give more than enough information than to give too little. And then another thing they say here is check the pattern for accuracy, completeness, and say that right.
Specific,
Oh, you can't say it either. Specific for specifics.
specificity.
Um, and this is something I have a pet peeve with. You really know the patterns, at least in quilting, that have been tried, tested, and edited, and the ones that haven't. And again, I go back to the freebies that you often can get from manufacturers of fabric. They don't test them because the final product, you'll have a lot of problem getting the final product and you'll get very frustrated. That's what they should be doing is pattern testing. What about, and I would
Yeah,
assume the same for you.
yeah, pattern testing should be done. I know individual places do pattern testing. Sometimes the pattern writer doesn't always take the advice of the pattern tester.
Yes. You know
Um,
about horror story
Now,
about
the one thing that annoys me is at the end, and I'm a fairly beginner sewer, is that things like buttonholes or hems or whatever, like in this particular pattern I have, just says buttonhole placement will depend on size and combination of buttonholes. Buttonholes are stitched vertically on the button band, so there's no actual guidance as to how many buttons you should be putting on the shirt or something like that. So it would be nice, I mean, especially as a beginner, to say, our recommended button spacing is this, right? But they don't do that. They just leave it up to you. And if so, if you're a true novice beginner, you may get a little bit, or maybe a little unsure about what your spacing should be or something.
another thing I have seen, not often, when you get something like that, they don't want to spend the time to explain something that they assume that you should already know how to do, but they may make a reference. See this website or see this YouTube video for further
Yeah.
instructions. Although I appreciate that being put in there, when I sit down to start working with a pattern, I want it all to be self-contained.
Yeah.
I don't want to have to go to other resources with it. Because that's going to just complicate things. It's going to take me more time with it all. I mean, I do appreciate if they put a reference in if they think there's something really complicated, especially if it says it's for a video. But some just say, oh, see Marjorie Taylor's instruction for making such and such. And no more reference from it. So it means I have to go to the internet, type in Marjorie Taylor, and I find 3 million Marjorie Taylors, and trying to figure out what they're referencing, what the specific is. So yeah, make it self-contained. You know, if everything's got to be covered in the one document. Okay, so I have a pattern. I have not opened this pattern yet. I only took it out of the plastic bag. I'm going to go through it and tell you what I like about it and what I don't like. I'm going to do an analysis. Now, you know, I said right off the beginning, the one thing that I don't do that I should do is really read the pattern thoroughly from beginning to end, and then, you know, highlight parts I might have a problem with or that I should be concerned about and things like that. Yeah, I never do that. And I picked this pattern for a couple of reasons. Now, I'm calling people out here. Sorry. This one is a pattern for this fabric line. I love this fabric line, this indigenous pattern or fabric. It's called Healing Waters, and it's by Northcott, and I have all of it right now. But I want to do a pattern with it. Well, I went looking for a pattern that uses this. This is the pattern that I found that you see on your screen. Oh, you don't see it on your screen. Sorry. Here we go. There it is. You see it on your screen now. I looked around to see if I could find patterns like it. No, I can't. This pattern is exclusive to this fabric line. It is by someone who designs for Northcott. Patty's Patchwork is what it's called. And I had a really bad experience with a pattern from the same designer. I used Northcott's O Canada line of fabrics. They came out with last year a panel and matching fabric to go with it. And I saw this pattern and I really liked it and I want to do it. So I bought the pattern written by this same person. You may remember that because I did not end up with that as my end result. I had to alter it, change it. I got so frustrated with it because I didn't understand what was going on, because things were left out in it and it was poorly written in my opinion. Now you could say, well, yeah, well, you're not an expert quilter. I shouldn't have to be an expert quilter. There weren't any blocks in it that were weird blocks, but it was the way the pattern was written. So I complained to Northcott about it. I never got an answer back. However, a few weeks later, the designer of the pattern put up YouTube videos, a series of them, taking you through the pattern, and it was sort of like a sew-along. Well, that's great after the fact for me, but as I watched them anyways because I was curious about how certain things needed to be done. She changed it. She changed how from her instructions in the pattern, she changed it when she did the video. Major change. Well, what's that tell you? One, there were a lot of complaints maybe about the pattern, so this was the correction. But I only found the video by accident, or the series of videos by accident. So I was very frustrated. I spoke to some other people at my local quilt store who had done patterns by this particular designer. Says, oh, in fact, the owner said, I won't order any more patterns by that designer because I've had too many complaints. Now, I have another one and I'm scared. I'm very, very afraid. In fact, I thought about constructing my own pattern for these fabrics because really, look at it. It's cut up panel pieces and flying geese. How hard can that be? Well, the problem was the time element. I probably could figure it out, but I have no idea from the picture as to what the size is. Also, when you're working with panels, panels are never printed straight. So how much do I have? I'd have to do math, a lot of math, to figure out how I can get the flying geese lined up in the way that they're there. So I broke down, I bought the pattern, hoping that maybe this one will be much better written. So I'm going to analyze it. And I'm going to look at the first page. This is the cover page, okay? It has two styles of this quilt using the same fabrics. One's in light, one's in dark. Okay, no problem. Little blurb on here. Just says showcase 1 and 2 section panels along with some large scale prints in lap throw or double size quilt. Okay, it tells me how many different sizes of quilts you can get out of the one pattern. I like that. Gives me choice. The unique sashing ties the components together. The sample quilts feature the ionic artwork of blah, 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 blah. And something else I didn't mention, they do mention the size of each one. That's good, because when you say to me lap quilt, what size do you think a lap quilt is? Size of your lap or bigger? Well, that's the thing.
Well, smaller than a queen size bed.
Oh yeah, a lot smaller. But is it? But what's the difference between a lap and a throw? I don't know either. I just know that a lap is usually smaller than a throw, and a throw is usually smaller than a queen size. And the sizes can vary. Now, that's not a big problem, but you might want to know how big your quilt's going to be. You know, especially if you're going to give it as a gift to somebody. Like if you've been following the instructions for making a lap, but you thought you were making a queen, that could be a problem. So I think it's a good idea. And they put it right there. And they also tell you that double size shown on the back cover. So on the back cover, that's the double size. Okay. All right, great. On the back of this pattern, it explains what fabrics you need, and it gives you the numbers of the fabric that correspond to Northcott's line of fabric in Healing Waters. That's pretty standard in most patterns, and that's a good thing to know. And then it tells you how much you're going to need for each of these fabrics as well. Okay, so far, this is what I would expect. This is what I'd appreciate. So you open up the pattern, but before we do it, now we can do this one of two ways. We can analyze this pattern first and then analyze yours first, or if there's something, I think we should do it one pattern at a time for it. And I'm not going to spend hours analyzing this. I'm just going to highlight certain things that I like. Okay, first page. There it is. And this gives you, breaks down the fabrics that you're going to need. It tells you how much of those fabrics you're going to need for each size, the lap, the throw, the double. So they've done it in a grid. I like that. It's organized in a table. Some patterns I've seen do it by sections. They go, okay, here's the lap. Then they go down here, and it's written in a paragraph format. Well, the way my brain works, I'm more of a chart person. So I like the chart feature. Maybe your brain works different and you like paragraphs. So far, so good. And another thing that I like about this pattern right now is they're calling their fabrics by letters. Fabric A, fabric B. Well, you might say, well, yeah, a lot of them do it. Not necessarily. If it's fabric for a specific, that's been a pattern that's been made for a specific fabric line, they will give you the name of each of the pieces of fabric. What if you're not using that fabric? And most times when I buy a pattern, I'm not buying in this case I did, but I'm not buying the same fabric. I'm going to my stash or whatever. So then I have to do a lot of extra labeling, and that can get confusing. You know, I'll have to sign my own letters to it. Not hard to do, but it can get confusing. So I like this right now off the bat. So far, I'm impressed. Oh, are there page numbers? Yes. In fact, it says page 1 of 6. So it's a little thing, but I printed this pattern. So what happens if I didn't realize that my printer didn't print the whole thing? I thought it did. It stopped. It was done. And then I'm going through the pattern, and I get to a part and go, oh, I think I'm missing a page. So I know right here, page 1 of 6, page 2 of 6. I know exactly. Okay, let's go to page 2 of 6. Now, just looking at the page physically, you can see there's bold text and there's numbers. So it looks like what this designer has done is what I said about chunking. First thing you're talking about is they talk about general piecing. They give you the standards. All seams are 1/4 inch. Okay. It says press seams towards darker fabric, unless noted. Has a tip for lining patches for sewing, which is much appreciated because there are some angles here you have to deal with in this quilt. Then it talks about piecing the blocks. And it takes you through, and it's got diagrams. And the diagrams have the pieces labeled as well. A1, A2 corresponds to the instruction. That's good. Now, one thing that they do, though, is they also give you additional information depending on the size. Down here it says throw and double. So you've got to, so if I'm analyzing this, I will be highlighting. If I'm going to do, let's say for this pattern, I think I'm probably going to do the throw. I will take my highlighter and I will highlight every place where the word throw is used. Sometimes they will put in brackets when they say cut 4 4-inch squares. In brackets, it'll say 6, 9 or something like that. Those correspond to the other sizes, and they usually, or they should tell you that when the first number in the brackets is for this size, the second number in the brackets for this size. So again, I take my highlighter and I highlight those because it's very easy when you're in the midst of all of this and you're cutting up a lot of pieces of fabric for things. It's very easy to not cut enough because you didn't see, your mind didn't see the right corresponding number. And it goes on. Lots of diagrams. This I appreciate in this panel. This was something that was not in the one I had the problems with, written by the same designer. I have a visual because I'm cutting the panel up and it's showing me what each sub panel looks like. I like that. And they're in color. They're in color. So far I am suitably impressed. Okay, flying geese and sashing units. Oh, look, she's explaining exactly how to make the flying geese with a diagram. That's very good. I've done flying geese before, but I still appreciate seeing the diagram to jog my memory. Now, oh my God. First thing that pisses me off about a pattern. I see 1/8 of an inch. For example, select one 5 1/4 inch print square and 4 2 7/8 fabric case squares. I don't deal with 1/8 of an inch. And this is a trick I learned from Donna, the hostess with the mostest, in one of her classes at Ultimate Sewing. She says, round it up to the next 1/4 inch. So in this case, I would be cutting 4 squares, not 2 7/8 inches. I'd be cutting them at 3 inches. Now you're going to say, yeah, but you need them to be exact so they fit. No, you trim them afterwards, because in this method that she's showing for making flying geese, these pieces are actually oversized, and it should tell you in here what the finished unit should be, and it does. Geese units should measure 2.5 by 4.5 inches. So it's really easy to trim them down to those size after you get them constructed. So that's why taking your 1/8 of an inch and rounding them up. So if it was 2 1/8, go to 2 1/4. If it's 2 3/8, go to 2 1/2, etc. It'll make your life so much easier. And then you just trim. Okay. Again, she's showing in one instruction, she's showing you the order of the fabric for the flying geese. And she has a little chart. And it's telling you how many flying geese you have to make for each size. So that's good. That's good. So far, this one looks like I can really handle this without any problems. She has more instructions. She has lots more pictures showing you. And yeah, it goes on. You see? This one looks, now I haven't done a deep analysis, but rate my gut reaction from what I've done now, and believe me, with this, what I'm just doing right now is more than I usually do for any pattern. Okay, I should do this. But I'm thinking this is going to be good. Now, she comes to finishing, which is finishing your borders, and then she's got some tips about machine binding. And this looks interesting because I do my binding by machine completely. And that's what she's saying here. She says, I sew all my bindings completely by machine. And she gives detailed instructions on how she does her binding. That would be really helpful for somebody who struggles with binding. And you know, there are a lot of people who do quilting, and they say the worst part is binding. And I don't mind it. I know my technique for doing it works fine with me. But if I was a beginner, I'd appreciate that. And I'm going to read that anyways, just see if I can learn something new from her. So she also has some tips on how to use her pattern that come with it as well. All right. This is not what we got with the other pattern I did by her. Did not get clear visuals that seem to be in here. I think this is a vast improvement over the one I did by this same designer before. So does that mean, one, was she having an off day when she wrote the other one? Was it hurried? Or has she learned from, because I'm sure I'm not the only person that struggled with that. So we'll see. When I like I said, I haven't done a deep analysis of this, but my impression right now is this is a well-written pattern. Tune in another time and I'll give you a follow-up on it once I actually work with it. Okay, what about you?
Okay, well, I've used this pattern quite a bit. It's called the Gosling short sleeve shirt with a front yoke with optional sleeve tabs and a pocket. So there it tells you right at the front the description of the shirt, gives you a little picture of the shirt, drawing anyway, and it also tells you it's a multi-size pattern that goes from extra small to 2 extra large. So you can sew any of those sizes. Now, I have found that clothing sizes are sometimes different than off the rack. It gives you a table of contents to tell you the different parts of this.
Oh, that would be something I never thought about in a quilting pattern. A table of contents would be helpful.
There is also a contact number thing where you can contact them if they run into a problem.
Ooh.
First thing they have are shirts. You got to figure out your size of your shirt that you're going to make, right? And in this particular one, they give you a pattern size, but they give you the U.S. sizes, the Australian and United Kingdom sizes, and the European Union sizes, all on this page, so that you can, depending on where you're from, you can pick the size that works for you best.
Yeah, because sizes vary wherever you are.
Part of that has the chest and your chest measurements and your waist measurements and everything in your height, all in this page as well, to try and associate it with whatever size you're using. And it's both in imperial and metric sizes.
So they have sizes like slim fit, classic fit, and pig size.
Yeah. So then, and they give you a guide as to how to measure your body so that you fit those sizes. Now, this is a PDF pattern, so it gets printed off in the PDF format. But here is a more detailed description of your sizes, which is good. I like this. There's instructions on how to print the pattern out because it's a PDF pattern, right?
So basically, when you print out this pattern, you're going to have to tape pieces
Yeah,
together,
well,
right?
I printed out on 8.5 by 11 paper, but it's sized for 8.5 11 paper. You can take it to a printer and have it printed out in great big huge sheets. But what I do is I just print it out on a standard paper and stick all the pieces together.
But do they give you a scale?
Yeah, no, they give you a scale. Actually,
Like
yeah.
a little square that says...
There's a little square if you're printing it out on the first page. There's a little square on this side here, and it'll give you a square that says 2 inches, or it'll give you 5 centimeters square, depending on what you're into.
So the idea is you measure when you've printed that out.
When you print this first page out, you have to measure that square and make sure that that measures 2 inches square.
And if it doesn't, it means what? That your printer is like set at, instead of 100%, it's set at
actually
page.
What your printer should be set at is actual size.
Yeah.
And if it's set at 100%, it's usually off. It doesn't print properly. So your pattern has to match that 2-inch square for it to be printed out in the correct size. Yeah. Now, one nice thing about PDF patterns is that if you pick a certain size, you can just print that one layer, and meaning that you will only print that one size. You have the option of printing all the sizes together, like you would on a regular pattern when you get it, or you can just print with the size that you require. That way you don't get mixed up as to where the cutting lines are for when you're cutting out your pattern pieces. Mm-hmm. That might confuse you. But anyway, then you've got a spot here, and each of the pages that print out come as a tile with a number on it. Mm-hmm. And it's a map. You just put it together, and based on this guide, and you tape it all together and then cut out the pieces afterwards.
So I would say that's a really good thing to have, but do all patterns that are PDF come with something
Most
like
of
that?
them, the ones that I've worked with, all have them. There's a different pattern here that I've got.
And I can see how
they do something similar. It's not quite as elaborate, but they do that sort of thing too. So yeah, they're all pretty. The ones that I've used are usually pretty good at showing you how to put stuff together. Ooh, that one's falling apart. Oops.
Oh, there we go. Yeah.
Anyway,
Are those pages numbered?
yeah, they are.
Oh, good, because it was falling apart on them, so you need the pages numbered.
So then, the next thing I get here is a shopping list of what fabric you require. So in this one, it needs fabric and matching color thread. It requires 11 buttons in 1 yard of lightweight interfacing. And then it gives you a suggested type of fabric that you should use for the shirt. Like in this case, it says cottons, polycotton, rayon cotton, bamboo cotton mixes, linen types, chambray, and tencels. Here it tells you your seam allowances for the whole thing is 3/8 of an inch. Has other things like storing your pattern in terms of use. They also suggest you pre-wash your fabrics, and then they give you a legend here as to what your sizes are, right? For if you print out all the pattern and all the sizes, the dots indicate which pattern that you should be referring to on the printed out pattern. And it also tells you your sides of your fabric. It shows you a dark side for the front, a light side for the back, and then the side with the dots on it is your interfacing, so that you have a guide on your printed pattern as to what each piece is for.
That might be handy in some quilt patterns too. Although generally speaking, we all goes back to the assumption that we're always sewing right sides together.
And there's a little thing on the bottom here is definitions, where it says what stay stitching is, what understitching is, what top stitching is what WRST is, with right sides of fabric together.
How did they come up with the W?
I don't know. And CF for center front and CB for center back. Okay. And here, the next thing, they have all the different pieces that you have for the shirt.
So you basically would take the pieces after you've cut them out and give them the same number.
Yeah. And if you notice on here, very easily, this is the sleeve. You have double notches on the back part of the sleeve. There's a single notch here and 2 notches there, which indicate the back of the sleeve and the front of the sleeve. So as I was talking to you before. So it shows you all the notches on there. Then the next, we haven't even gotten the pattern yet.
I was going to say, you get a lot of information though.
And then they've got a chart on how much fabric you require for each different size. And this is in both metric and in imperial for yards. And they also do something like they give you size based on the width of your fabric as being 45 inches or 60 inches. Because sometimes if you're using quilting cotton, it's usually around 42, 45 inches. If you're using some garment fabric, is at 60 inches wide. So this is really a good thing to have. Plus they lay out all the pieces to be cut out based on the width of your fabric from different sizes.
Well, that's something that you'll find in some quilting patterns too. They will have a diagram showing you how to get the different pieces that you need to cut out of a, say, like a fact quarter. Oftentimes they do this with a fact quarter, showing you how to cut it so that you don't waste fabric. I tend to get screwed up when I see
now, just to show you an example of a bad pattern. This is a pattern by Wardrobe by Me. They sometimes have things that are lacking. For instance, on their fabric thing, they've got fabric requirements in imperial. Here they have another page for metric, but the fabric requirements for imperial are listed here, and they've got the interfacing at 45 inches, but there's nowhere on here that tells you what the width of fabric is supposed to be. So you have to guess. I'm assuming it's at least 45 inches, but you don't know for sure. Whether example, so what's the point of giving you an estimate if they're not giving you an indication as to what width of fabric you're supposed to be using? So that's a bad example. Then they've got, see, they had that one. This was cutting layouts for 45 inches of fabric width, and this is cutting layouts for 60-inch width of fabric.
I think I'm understanding why there's a table of contents, because this is a book.
Now, this is where it starts to get the meat of the thing. It goes step by step on how to sew together each piece. Like the back, you have to put darts in the top, then you got to put the yoke on, and it tells you where to sew all the different things are step by step with pictures, which I like. This is actually very easy to follow. Again, they tell you how to put the fronts on and the backs and the button bands, and then you start. This is your assembly to put the collar on, and they give you detailed instructions on how to do that. They've got pictures on how to put the collar together and how to insert the sleeve. And there you see to make sure your notches match for your sleeve so that you sew your sleeve in the correct way, that the front goes in the front and the back goes in the back. So, and then they give you a page of optional things that you can put on your shirt, which is a pocket, which is optional. You don't have to put pockets on shirts. You can optionally not have it. And this shirt actually has an option to put a tab on the top of the shirt for decoration. So they don't really have that. Now, the only thing I don't like about this pattern that it doesn't have is it doesn't really have a guide as to how to place your buttons on it. They have the assumption that you have some sort of expertise at doing that.
Doesn't that seem funny, though? Because I was going to say, this pattern, in my opinion, well, would you say this is a gold standard of patterns?
I think this is a pretty good pattern, but I have seen other patterns, like you've got this Wardrobe by Me pattern. It's lacking in showing you how much fabric you require, but
it's lacking in a few other things, isn't it?
No, but actually, I think their patterning assembly is a little bit clearer at sewing stuff than the other one.
Wait, you mean this one that you're showing right now is clearer than the
Yeah,
other
I
one?
think it is. Yeah.
Oh.
But I think they also have the same problem about they don't really tell you where the buttons go. No, actually, they do show you the buttons there.
Oh, okay.
They give you buttons suggestions.
Okay, so now I'm confused, because I was assuming that the first pattern you showed was really an example of a really good one, and this one you were showing is not so good.
Well,
but it sounds to me now like you're saying this one's better.
This one has good qualities to it, but it is lacking in some areas.
Okay,
this one is probably the best overall pattern. The only thing that it really lacks is the suggestion of where to place your buttons.
Which I was going to say, they've spent all this time writing this. Would it have killed them to add just a little bit more about the placement of the buttons?
Exactly.
It just seems like they were tired by the time they got there and went, the hell with it. Figure it out for yourself. Put in a zipper.
Yeah. So I mean, with shirts can be intimidating to sew. So it would be nice to have more detail.
Okay. So here's a question for you. Knowing what I do know about sewing and that, if I was to take that pattern and follow it, would I be able to make a shirt?
I think you would be. Yeah, that's a good question. I'm not sure.
I'm not asking you if my shirt would be as good as yours.
No,
I'm just saying, could I? Let's say I'd never ever had made a shirt before in my life, but
yeah, actually, I think you probably could. Yeah.
Yeah, we may have to try that someday. I don't know. I don't really, I'm not that interested. So before people saying, yeah, let's see you do a video of you making a shirt, because I know what you're really telling me. It's going to be a comedy routine is what you're looking for out of it all. But that would be a real test right there. If you could take a pattern and give it to somebody who has only a basic knowledge of sewing, that have never made a garment before, and if they could from a pattern actually make a very, that could probably would be mistakes, but could do a pretty good
I personally
job.
think that it would be best if you had a video tutorial with it as well, because there are idiosyncrasies to sewing a shirt together that, especially if two pieces don't quite match,
Yeah.
what do you do with it?
Yeah, true. And
So,
visuals are always good, in my opinion, because a lot of people are visual learners anyway, so it doesn't
and
hurt to have
there
them.
are tricks to setting a sleeve in, and that's probably not really discussed in here.
No. Okay, so yeah. But anyways, all right. So the whole point of what we were doing today was to talk about the good, the bad, and the ugly of patterns. And we've all experienced the whole gamut. I am sure there are patterns that you absolutely love, no matter whether you're sewing clothing or you're sewing a quilt, and ones that you'll probably never touch again. I'm giving this one a second chance. And just as my initial thing is, I think this person maybe was acceptable to um, constructive criticism from the other one. That one you were showing at the end, though, your instructor, who's a tester for her patterns, said she didn't take criticism well.
Yeah, the problem with the wardrobe by me, she's a lady that lives in, I'm not sure if it's Denmark or her picture's on the back, that produces these patterns. And she doesn't really say where she's from. She's somewhere in the Baltic regions that she does that. It's either Norway or Denmark or someplace like that. And she produces these patterns, and she has quite a few men's patterns, and some of them are quite good. But there are times where the pattern is lacking in certain spots. And she has quite a few testers test them, but a friend of mine tests some of the patterns, and he has said that sometimes he'll come back and make a suggestion for her pattern, and she isn't happy about it. So, like, and one of them was not necessarily this. I think it was this shirt actually that she had the notches. The notches weren't on the sleeves, right, to sew them in, and her response to the testers were, well, an experienced sewer will know how to put them in.
And see, I take issue with that kind of comment, because you're not writing patterns for experienced people. You're writing patterns for all skill levels.
So the one thing is that she did modify this pattern several times, because I had several revisions, several times, and she did add the notches.
So she finally gave into it. So enough people must have complained. And just as an aside, talking about that, sometimes patterns are altered by the publishers of the pattern, because Ron Collins.
Yeah, okay, I have this pattern. I started making it, but I haven't actually finished it. It's for like a bomber jacket. And I took a Ron Collins class where Ron Collins was actually teaching it. And I started working on this pattern, and I was confused by a few things, like setting the pocket in was different than what I was used to, and the description of doing it. And the other one was how to assemble the layers for this, because it has about 3 or 4 layers to the garment. And basically what Ron Collins told me was that he sells the rights to the pattern to the company to make the pattern, right? And they put in their own instructions, their own methods of how they would build the garment. And it's based on whatever their formula is, or whatever their technicians are, or whatever that do it. And it isn't based on the person that has written the original pattern. So they make alterations to it based on what they think it should be. and it's not always what the publisher or the author of the pattern wants it to be. So there are some things in here that don't really work very well with this pattern, and Ron Collins himself made suggestions of a different way to build it.
So sometimes it's not the fault of the designer if a pattern isn't absolutely clear. It falls down to whoever the editors are of the company that is producing it.
Yeah, that particular pattern is a Vogue pattern, and this pattern's a Vogue pattern, and Vogue steps in and basically standardizes the way their patterns are written, and it's not always for the best.
So that's an added dimension there, but I just thought we should bring that up to not blame everything on the pattern writer, because there could be influences from powers that be that are beyond their control. Okay, so I hope you got something out of this today. We shall see what happens with this one when I get around to making it at some point. There is a link to this pattern, by the way, in the show notes below. So you'll find it there if you happen to be interested in it. Getting this fabric, though, is not easy because it sold out very quickly, and I don't know if and Northcutt probably will not reprint it. Give a second, whatever they call it.
Yeah, and it may actually have been only sold in Canada. I don't know.
Yeah, that's a possibility. Well, Northcutt is a Canadian company as well, manufacturer of fabrics. But anyways, the whole point of this was to talk about the frustrations we have come upon, how we get around them. And I guess the bottom line is to do what I tell you to do, not what I do, which is read it, analyze it before you cut anything or sew anything. I guess that's the best advice I can give you on this, and I must start following my own advice. It's not like reading a novel. They're kind of boring.
In my case, if you're doing a garment, I think you really need to have a good look at the pattern, because like I said, patterns can vary from manufacturer to manufacturer, and you need to be familiar. You don't want to get halfway through doing a shirt and realize, oh, I'm not sure how to do this.
Sewn the sleeve to the collar. Yeah, whatever. How do we know that?
Yeah, I did that.
How we know that? It's very difficult to get it on. Oh, I love this shirt. And this is a nice customization.
Its sleeves are sometimes hard to sew into the armhole because it's a curve.
Yeah, okay,
right.
Great,
so
great.
Anyway,
excuses. We don't need to get into. We need to cut off.
Okay.
Okay. Anyways, I hope you found this interesting. I hope you found some things we said helpful or whatever. And yeah, so that's this week. So Chatty, thanks for joining us. And we're going to go now. So I will say goodbye. Say goodbye, Walter.
Goodbye.